Welcome back, history lovers. Today, we drift into a world of intrigue, power, and peril, a world where beauty, influence, and survival were intimately intertwined. We're exploring a life few dared to live, the life of a concubine. Could you survive it? To understand this, we must first immerse ourselves in the reality of what it meant to be a concubine, a figure who walked the delicate line between privilege and peril, influence and invisibility. Concubinage was far more than an arrangement of companionship or desire. It was a system deeply embedded in the political, social, and economic structures of societies across the globe. From the grand palaces of imperial China to the ornate courts of the Ottoman Empire, from medieval European dynasties to the sprawling harems of Mughal India, concubines played a role that was as complex as it was dangerous. They were not mere symbols of a ruler's power. They were instruments of political strategy, sources of lineage, and often pawns in the intricate chess game of dynastic politics. Unlike wives, whose positions were often legally sanctioned and socially recognized, concubines existed in a liminal space. Their influence could be extraordinary, but it was always contingent upon the favor of the ruler or master. A slight change in fortune, a whispered rumor, a jealous rival, or a miscalculated word could shift a life from luxury to exile or even death. Survival in such a world required an extraordinary combination of intelligence, intuition, and social acumen, qualities that many concubines developed to a level far surpassing their contemporaries. For many, the path into concubinage was not chosen freely. In some cases, it was the result of birth circumstances. Young women born into impoverished families, enslaved communities, or war-torn regions often had few options. Families, desperate to secure food, shelter, or social advancement, might offer their daughters to the service of powerful men. In other cases, the selection was more deliberate, influenced by political needs or strategic alliances. In China, for instance, girls from certain provinces or families might be presented at court as part of a system designed to provide the emperor with a pool of potential concubines, each carefully selected for appearance, intellect, and demeanor. In the Ottoman Empire, the practice of devshirme, though primarily involving boys for military service, paralleled the way young women were sometimes brought into harems for service and eventual elevation to concubine status. Even in Europe, where concubinage was less formalized but equally significant, kings and nobles often maintained relationships with women whose influence extended far beyond the private sphere, shaping politics, court life, and succession in subtle yet powerful ways. Yet even for those who entered this life by choice or opportunity, the journey was fraught with uncertainty. A concubine's fate was inextricably tied to the whims of her patron. Unlike legal wives, she had no guaranteed rights or protections, and her position could be revoked at any moment. Her status depended on a precarious balance of charm, skill, and intelligence. In some instances, concubines could wield immense influence, advising rulers, shaping policies, and even participating in the selection of heirs. History provides examples of concubines whose counsel and insight swayed the course of empires. Wu Zetian, who began her journey in the Tang dynasty as a concubine, ultimately ascended to become the only reigning empress of China, demonstrating the remarkable heights that could be reached. However, such stories were the exception rather than the rule. Many concubines lived lives defined by uncertainty, their days a constant negotiation between desire for favor and fear of reprisal. The palace or harem, the physical space where concubines lived, was itself a universe of rules, hierarchies, and rituals. It could be a place of lavish luxury where silks, jewelry, and fine food surrounded the residence. Yet it was also a gilded cage. Walls, gates, and attendants ensured that movement was restricted and that interactions were monitored. Privacy was limited, and every action, every gesture, and every conversation was observed. The hierarchy within the harem or palace was intricate. Senior concubines often held authority over newcomers, while attendants and eunuchs acted as intermediaries, enforcing rules and transmitting information. Navigating this hierarchy required subtlety and tact. Alliances and rivalries could form overnight, and missteps could be costly. A moment of arrogance, a word spoken in the wrong context, or failure to observe a social cue could lead to demotion, humiliation, or dismissal. The stakes were high and the pressures immense. Life as a concubine was also shaped by the expectations of beauty, demeanor, and conduct. Physical appearance was a constant preoccupation, and many concubines adhered to rigorous routines to maintain their allure. Cosmetics, bathing rituals, diet, and exercise were all part of the daily regimen, designed to preserve youth and elegance. Yet beauty alone was insufficient. Intellectual engagement, artistic skill, and conversational wit were equally important. A concubine needed to entertain, engage, and charm, all while remaining perceptive enough to read the moods and intentions of her patron. The combination of appearance, intellect, and subtlety often determined her standing and her survival. Those who excelled could gain influence, while those who failed to navigate the intricate social dynamics risked marginalization. Beyond the physical and social demands, concubines were often caught in the crosscurrents of political and familial intrigue. Courts were arenas of power struggles, where factions competed for influence, and succession was a constant source of tension. Concubines could be used as tools in these struggles, their relationships leveraged to secure alliances or placate powerful families. Some concubines were involved in the selection of heirs or in shaping policies, their counsel sought by rulers who valued their insight. Others were sidelined or removed when their usefulness waned. In such an environment, adaptability was crucial. A concubine who could anticipate shifts in favor, who could navigate alliances and rivalries with skill, and who could cultivate a reputation of intelligence and loyalty, had a greater chance of surviving and even thriving. Despite the risks, the life of a concubine also offered opportunities that were rare for women in many historical societies. Access to education, the arts, and culture was often unparalleled. Concubines learned music, poetry, dance, and literature, not merely for entertainment, but as tools of influence. The ability to engage a ruler intellectually or artistically could elevate a concubine above her peers, granting her a measure of power that extended beyond the personal to the political. In this sense, the palace became both a stage and a classroom, where survival required constant learning and adaptation. However, for all its potential rewards, life as a concubine demanded constant vigilance. Rivalry was ever present, and jealousy could manifest in subtle or violent ways. Stories from historical records tell of schemes, poisonings, and plots designed to remove favored concubines or diminish their influence. Trust was scarce, and alliances were often temporary. Emotional resilience was as critical as intelligence or beauty, for the psychological demands of constant observation, suspicion, and competition could be draining. The role of concubines was also deeply tied to issues of lineage and inheritance. Bearing children, particularly sons, could secure a concubine's position and influence. In some societies, producing an heir could transform a concubine from a marginal figure into a central player in court politics, ensuring her family's advancement and stability. Conversely, failure to produce children could limit opportunities and render a concubine vulnerable to dismissal or neglect. The stakes of reproduction were immense and the pressures unrelenting. In examining the lives of concubines, it is also important to recognize the diversity of their experiences. Not all concubines lived in palaces, not all faced the same risks or had the same opportunities. Some were relatively autonomous, managing their own households or wielding influence in ways that extended beyond the palace. Others were confined entirely, their lives dictated by schedules, rituals, and the favor of their patron. Yet, across cultures and centuries, certain themes remain consistent. The intersection of power, beauty, intelligence, and vulnerability, and the need for extraordinary skill and resilience to navigate a world where fortunes could change overnight. The life of a concubine, then, was neither simple nor predictable. It was a life defined by contrasts, wealth and danger, privilege and restriction, influence and invisibility. It required constant calculation, keen observation, and the ability to adapt to ever-changing circumstances. It demanded courage, intelligence, and an understanding of human ambition and desire that few could master. And yet, despite the risks, many concubines thrived, leaving their mark on history in ways that extended far beyond the personal. Their stories reveal the complexities of power and gender, of survival and ambition, and remind us that history is not only shaped by kings and emperors, but by those who maneuvered in the shadows, who understood the delicate balance between visibility and discretion, influence and vulnerability. To consider whether one could survive such a life is to confront questions of courage, cunning, and resilience. It is to imagine navigating a world where every gesture is observed, every word analyzed, and every relationship potentially fraught with danger. It is to walk a path where beauty is both a weapon and a vulnerability, where intelligence must be paired with tact, and where emotional strength is essential for survival. The concubine's world, though distant in time and place, challenges us to reflect on the complexities of human ambition and the enduring strategies for navigating power and influence. In the end, understanding the life of a concubine requires us to look beyond the glamour and the intrigue, to see the careful calculations, the alliances, the rivalries, and the constant vigilance that defined their existence. It is a study of resilience in a world where survival depended on wit as much as beauty, on patience as much as charm, and on understanding human nature as much as mastering one's own fate. The concubine story is, therefore, not only a tale of individual survival, but a reflection of broader societal structures, of gender, power, and politics. It is a story that resonates across cultures and centuries, revealing both the vulnerabilities and the strengths of those who lived within the complex webs of influence, desire, and ambition. To explore their lives is to gain insight into the delicate balance of fortune and peril, favor and jealousy, power and vulnerability that shaped the destinies of countless women throughout history. Luxury and confinement were two sides of the same coin for concubines, a duality that defined their entire existence. To understand life as a concubine, one must first grasp the paradox of their world, a world filled with lavish splendor, yet carefully circumscribed by rules, rituals, and hierarchy. The palace, or harem, was both sanctuary and cage. Its walls offered protection, but they also restricted freedom, turning the lives of concubines into a delicate dance of privilege and control. Every day was governed by expectations, and each moment carried the weight of both opportunity and risk. A concubine's life revolved around a complex interplay of appearances, duties, and vigilance, and her survival depended on mastering these intertwined demands. At first glance, the life of a concubine appeared enviable. Silks of the finest quality draped their bodies, delicate jewelry adorned their wrists, necks, and fingers, and sumptuous food awaited them at regular intervals. The palace itself was a testament to opulence. Elaborately decorated chambers, fragrant gardens, and grand halls where ceremonies, celebrations, and audiences took place. But behind this veneer of luxury lay a highly regulated environment. Concubines were under constant scrutiny. Their schedules, movements, and interactions were monitored, sometimes by attendants and sometimes by eunuchs, whose loyalty to the ruler ensured that nothing escaped notice. Privacy was limited, and even leisure had to be carefully calculated to avoid displeasing the patron or the court. Daily life was structured around both cultivation and performance. Concubines were expected to maintain not only physical beauty, but also intellectual and artistic accomplishments. They spent hours learning and practicing music, dance, calligraphy, and poetry. Such skills were not mere entertainment, they were instruments of influence. A ruler's interest could be captivated by talent, wit, or charm, and these attributes often determined which concubines were favored and which remained peripheral. Those who excelled could elevate themselves to positions of considerable power, whereas failure to perform effectively or to meet expectations could result in marginalization or exclusion. Physical appearance demanded constant attention. The maintenance of beauty was almost a profession in itself, involving elaborate bathing routines, intricate hairstyles, and careful application of cosmetics. Dieting and exercise were often strictly enforced, designed to preserve youth, vitality, and elegance. In some cultures, specialized diets were prescribed to enhance skin tone or maintain slenderness, while herbal remedies were used to prevent illness or fatigue. Every aspect of a concubine's body was, in essence, under surveillance, not only by attendants, but by the eyes of rivals seeking opportunities to diminish her standing. Beauty was a currency in this environment, and it had to be preserved at all costs, yet it was never enough on its own. Intelligence, charm, and social acumen were equally critical. A concubine had to read subtle cues, interpret moods, and respond appropriately to maintain favor. Wit and conversation were tools for navigating complex social dynamics, from impressing the patron to managing relationships with other women in the palace. Knowledge of court etiquette, traditions, and political currents was essential. The seemingly simple act of greeting the ruler, participating in ceremonies, or responding to questions required careful attention, for any misstep could have consequences. In this environment, charm without discretion could be as dangerous as ignorance without talent. The palace hierarchy added another layer of complexity to daily life. Senior concubines often wielded authority over newcomers, supervising their routines, providing guidance, or enforcing rules. Eunuchs and attendants acted as intermediaries, relaying information, ensuring discipline, and maintaining order. Navigating this structure required subtlety. Alliances could be advantageous, but rivalries were common and sometimes lethal. Observing and understanding the dynamics between senior and junior concubines, as well as between concubines and attendants, was crucial for survival. A concubine who failed to perceive threats or opportunities risked marginalization or even removal from the court. Amidst these pressures, leisure and recreation had carefully defined boundaries. Gardens, music rooms, and private chambers offered moments of respite, yet even relaxation could be fraught with political significance. A walk in the garden, a musical performance, or a private conversation could be interpreted as a display of ambition or an attempt to gain influence. Every action had to balance personal comfort with the strategic considerations of court life. There were no truly private moments, and every gesture could be scrutinized for meaning. The emotional and psychological demands were intense. Constant competition, uncertainty, and the ever-present possibility of disfavor required remarkable resilience. Jealousy among concubines could manifest in subtle sabotage, gossip, or even open confrontation. Fear of losing status or favor was a daily companion. For many, emotional strength was as critical as physical beauty or intellectual skill. The ability to maintain composure under scrutiny, to conceal vulnerability, and to present an appearance of grace and confidence was essential. Emotional intelligence, understanding the moods, desires, and motivations of both patrons and peers, became a tool for survival. Ritual and ceremony permeated daily life. Concubines were required to participate in religious observances, cultural events, and formal audiences, each carrying expectations for behavior, attire, and demeanor. Proper participation reinforced the image of the ruler's court as orderly and prestigious, while mistakes could damage a concubine's reputation. Learning these rituals demanded diligence, memory, and careful observation, for deviation could be interpreted as disrespect, incompetence, or ambition. In essence, every aspect of daily life was a performance, and the stage extended to every corridor, garden, and hall of the palace. Food and dining also had strategic significance. Meals were not merely sustenance. They were social occasions, opportunities to display grace, favor, and knowledge of etiquette. Seating arrangements, choice of dishes, and conduct during meals could signal rank or influence. Some concubines cultivated relationships with chefs or attendants to ensure preference or access to delicacies. Others used these moments to observe rivals or subtly demonstrate skills and refinement. Even eating became a carefully managed performance within a highly politicized environment. Health and wellness were constant concerns. Illness could remove a concubine from favor or diminish her influence, so routines included not only diet and exercise but also medical treatments, herbal remedies, and spiritual practices. Healers, physicians, and attendants worked to maintain vitality, and failure to adhere to prescribed routines could jeopardize a concubine's standing. Physical fitness and stamina were essential for enduring long ceremonies, entertaining the patron, and meeting the rigorous demands of palace life. The interpersonal dynamics among concubines shaped much of daily existence. Alliances and friendships could provide protection and support, while rivalries threatened security and influence. Negotiating these relationships required astute judgment and diplomacy. A seemingly trivial comment or action could be interpreted as a challenge to authority or an attempt to undermine a rival, leading to tension or confrontation. Understanding the motives of others, predicting behavior, and strategically choosing when to act or remain silent were daily exercises in social navigation. Education and intellectual development were also central. Concubines were often trained in reading, writing, history, and philosophy to engage in meaningful conversation with their patrons. A concubine who could discuss literature, politics, or strategy intelligently could command respect and attention, gaining influence far beyond what beauty alone could provide. Knowledge became a form of power, complementing charm, physical appeal, and emotional intelligence. In some courts, the ability to advise, entertain, or influence the ruler intellectually could determine long-term security and prominence. Even spiritual practices played a role. Concubines might be expected to participate in religious rituals, maintain pious appearances, or observe fasting and prayers. These practices reinforced the court's moral and cultural image while also offering opportunities for reflection, meditation, or subtle political positioning. Piety could enhance favor or influence, while neglect could be interpreted as negligence or impropriety. Religious observances thus became another domain in which strategy, perception, and conduct intersected. Despite the regimented and demanding nature of daily life, concubines often sought moments of creativity and personal expression. Music, dance, poetry, and artistic pursuits provided outlets for individuality, allowed the cultivation of talent, and served as tools for gaining favor. In some cases, these creative accomplishments could elevate a concubine's status, attract attention from powerful figures, and offer protection against rivals. Yet even these activities had to be carefully balanced, ensuring they impressed without appearing presumptuous or ambitious beyond accepted boundaries. The passage of time in the palace also had profound implications. Youth and beauty were transient, and aging presented challenges to status and survival. Concubines had to adapt, relying more on intelligence, social skill, and political acumen as physical attributes waned. Some successfully transitioned into influential positions, becoming advisors, mentors, or patrons of culture themselves. Others, unable to navigate these changes, faced decline, marginalization, or removal. Understanding the impermanence of favor and cultivating adaptability were central to survival in this environment. Ultimately, the daily life of a concubine was a complex tapestry of luxury, discipline, performance, and strategy. Every action, from grooming to conversation to participation in ceremonies, carried weight. Every relationship, from alliances to rivalries, demanded careful management. Every skill, from music to conversation to emotional intelligence, served as both shield and weapon. Life in the palace was a constant negotiation between visibility and discretion, ambition and restraint, charm and caution. Survival required mastery of this intricate web, a combination of intelligence, social insight, and resilience that few could achieve fully. The paradox of concubinage lies in its simultaneous privilege and peril. Concubines experienced wealth, education, and access to culture that few women in their societies could attain, yet they also faced restrictions, constant scrutiny, and the ever-present threat of disfavor or danger. Their lives were defined by contrasts: comfort and confinement, influence and vulnerability, skill and risk. Understanding their daily existence offers insight into the demands placed upon women who navigated these complex social hierarchies, revealing both their ingenuity and the harsh realities of court life. In examining the daily life of concubines, it becomes clear that survival was not merely a matter of physical endurance or beauty. It required constant vigilance, emotional intelligence, social skill, strategic thinking, and adaptability. Each day was a test of perception, judgment, and diplomacy. Every interaction was an opportunity or a risk. The ability to navigate these challenges, to maintain composure, and to leverage skill, talent, and charm determined whether a concubine thrived, merely survived, or fell victim to the perils of court life. Ultimately, daily life as a concubine was a study in contrasts, a world where luxury and danger were inseparable, and where survival depended as much on intellect, observation, and emotional resilience as on beauty and charm. To walk through such a life is to witness the extraordinary skill, courage, and adaptability required to navigate a world where every detail mattered, where influence was both fragile and potent, and where the balance between favor and peril could shift at any moment. Despite the risks and challenges of daily life, concubines often held remarkable potential for influence and power, and this influence could shape the course of empires in subtle and profound ways. The very position that rendered them vulnerable, their proximity to the ruler, their presence in the court, was simultaneously a source of opportunity. A concubine's success depended on her ability to leverage this proximity, transforming it into influence that could secure her survival, elevate her status, and, in rare cases, alter political landscapes. Yet, with power came peril, and the exercise of influence was never without consequence. To understand this dynamic is to understand the delicate, strategic, and often dangerous role concubines played behind closed doors. A favored concubine could affect decision-making at the highest levels. In many historical courts, rulers relied on women close to them not only for companionship but also for counsel. A concubine's perspective could shape appointments, sway political alliances, and influence the selection of heirs. The palace became a theater of negotiation, persuasion, and subtle manipulation, where intelligence, tact, and charm often mattered more than brute force. The ability to read moods, anticipate desires, and present advice in a manner that pleased rather than offended could determine whether a concubine rose in prominence or faded into obscurity. History provides numerous examples of concubines who wielded extraordinary power. In imperial China, the story of Wu Zetian stands as a testament to the potential for influence. Beginning her life in the palace as a concubine, she leveraged her intelligence, political acumen, and strategic alliances to ascend the ranks, eventually becoming the only woman to rule China as emperor in her own right. Her rise illustrates the remarkable potential of concubinage, not merely as a position of vulnerability, but as a platform for power. Yet Wu Zetian's story was exceptional, highlighting that such ascension required extraordinary skill, resilience, and timing. Most concubines never reached such heights, but even those who did not could exercise subtle influence, shaping court life, culture, and policy through persuasion, alliances, and strategic use of their presence. The means by which concubines exercised influence varied. Some relied on emotional intelligence and personal charm, cultivating relationships with the ruler that allowed them to subtly guide decisions. Others employed intellectual skill, offering insights into politics, strategy, or culture that earned them a reputation as indispensable advisors. Still others focused on forming networks of support within the palace, aligning themselves with key figures, attendants, or other concubines to protect their positions and amplify their influence. Understanding the motivations of others and anticipating their actions were critical skills, enabling concubines to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics with a combination of foresight, subtlety, and diplomacy. One of the most tangible ways a concubine could secure her influence was through childbirth, particularly the birth of sons. In many dynasties, producing a male heir could elevate a concubine from a peripheral figure to a central player in succession politics. Her son's future as a potential ruler made her indispensable, and her advice, presence, and interests could carry more weight than that of many senior officials. However, bearing children also carried risks. Rival concubines might attempt to undermine her position, and court intrigue could target both mother and child. Fertility and maternity thus became intertwined with strategy, politics, and personal survival, creating pressures that were as intense as they were consequential. The exercise of power was rarely direct. Open displays of ambition were dangerous and could invite retaliation from rivals or suspicion from the ruler. Influence was most effectively wielded through subtlety, indirect persuasion, and strategic action. A carefully placed suggestion, a whispered warning, or a demonstration of loyalty could shape decisions without attracting overt attention. The most successful concubines mastered the art of being present without dominating, influential without appearing threatening, and persuasive without being confrontational. This delicate balance required intelligence, patience, and a deep understanding of human behavior, particularly the psychology of rulers and the dynamics of the court. Yet the pursuit of power within the palace was fraught with constant risk. Favor could vanish in an instant due to illness, political shifts, or the emergence of a new rival. The fall from grace was often swift and severe, sometimes resulting in exile, imprisonment, or death. The court was a volatile environment where loyalties shifted, alliances broke down, and subtle errors could have catastrophic consequences. Survival demanded vigilance, the ability to anticipate threats, and the capacity to adapt to changing circumstances. A concubine who remained static, relying solely on past accomplishments or beauty, risked irrelevance or worse. The network of relationships within the palace was both a source of security and a field of potential conflict. Friendships among concubines could provide protection, information, and support, yet alliances were often temporary and contingent on changing circumstances. Rivalries were constant, fueled by jealousy, competition for attention, and the desire for influence. Understanding these dynamics, discerning genuine loyalty from opportunism, and managing interpersonal relationships with skill were critical components of a concubine's strategy for survival and influence. Intellectual and cultural engagement was another avenue of power. Concubines who could engage rulers in meaningful conversation, entertain with art and music, or demonstrate knowledge of politics and literature could command attention and respect. Their talents were tools for influence, allowing them to participate in discussions, offer advice, or subtly shape decisions. In some cases, concubines became patrons of artists, scholars, or religious figures, further expanding their influence and creating networks that extended beyond the palace walls. The cultivation of such skills required dedication, discipline, and strategic foresight, yet it provided a measure of security and authority that complemented the more personal forms of influence. The exercise of influence often extended to matters of succession and governance. In dynasties where succession was contested, a concubine's role could become pivotal, aligning with the right factions, advising the ruler on political matters, and cultivating the favor of key officials could ensure her son's position and, by extension, her own security. Such influence was rarely absolute and always precarious, yet it underscores the potential power embedded in a concubine's position. Even those who did not directly shape policy or succession could affect outcomes through subtle guidance, strategic communication, and careful management of relationships. Relational intelligence was central to navigating these dynamics. A concubine needed to interpret social cues, anticipate reactions, and respond in ways that preserved favor while minimizing risk. Reading the mood of the ruler, understanding the motivations of rivals, and predicting the outcomes of social interactions were daily exercises in strategy. Mistakes could lead to demotion, public humiliation, or removal from the court, highlighting the high stakes involved in every interaction. Success required constant observation, reflection, and adaptation, along with the ability to act decisively when opportunity or danger presented itself. Emotional intelligence and psychological resilience were equally vital. The pressures of competition, scrutiny, and uncertainty created intense emotional strain. Concubines had to manage their own fears, desires, and ambitions while remaining sensitive to the emotions and expectations of others. The ability to maintain composure under stress, to conceal vulnerability, and to respond with tact and diplomacy often determined whether a concubine thrived or faltered. Emotional strength was not optional. It was essential for navigating a world in which personal fortunes were intimately tied to the perceptions and moods of others. The interplay between visibility and discretion defined much of a concubine's strategy. Being noticed by the ruler was necessary for influence, yet being too visible could provoke jealousy or suspicion. Balancing these demands required constant calculation and awareness of context. A carefully timed appearance, a subtle display of talent, or a measured intervention in conversation could enhance influence without attracting undue attention. Conversely, misjudging the situation could have dire consequences, emphasizing the importance of situational awareness, timing, and strategic communication. Influence was also shaped by cultural and societal norms. The expectations of gender, status, and propriety dictated the ways in which concubines could assert themselves. Understanding these norms and skillfully navigating them allowed concubines to exercise power within socially acceptable boundaries. Those who could blend compliance with subtle assertion often succeeded in enhancing their position, while those who violated expectations faced ostracism or punishment. Mastery of cultural codes, etiquette, and social expectations was thus both a protective measure and a tool for influence. Political acumen was critical in a context where decisions could have lasting consequences. Concubines needed to assess risks, weigh the potential outcomes of actions, and make strategic choices. Aligning with the right factions, cultivating the favor of influential figures, and anticipating political shifts were ongoing tasks. The consequences of miscalculation could extend beyond personal misfortune to affect families, alliances, and even the broader political landscape. The stakes of influence within the palace were therefore profound, demanding intelligence, foresight, and strategic skill. Despite the inherent risks, concubines who successfully exercised influence often left lasting legacies. Through their counsel, patronage, and guidance, they shaped decisions, supported cultural development, and affected the succession of power. Their presence in history highlights the ways in which individuals operating behind the scenes, often constrained by social and political norms, could nonetheless wield significant authority. Even those whose influence was less direct contributed to the shaping of their societies, revealing the complex interplay between personal agency, social structures, and historical outcomes. Survival and influence were inseparable. To maintain favor and exercise power, concubines needed to cultivate multiple skills simultaneously: intelligence, charm, discretion, observation, and emotional resilience. They navigated a world in which fortunes could change suddenly, where alliances were fragile, and where success depended on a combination of personal ability and strategic insight. Those who mastered these demands could achieve remarkable outcomes, rising to positions of substantial authority or shaping the lives of rulers and empires in meaningful ways. Ultimately, the exercise of power behind closed doors was both an art and a science. It required understanding human nature, anticipating reactions, managing relationships, and strategically deploying talents and influence. The most successful concubines combined grace, intellect, and psychological insight with patience, timing, and discretion. Their ability to navigate these complexities determined their survival, status, and legacy, illustrating the extraordinary skill required to operate in the fraught and intricate environment of court life. Life as a concubine, therefore, was not merely a passive existence, but an active engagement with power, strategy, and human behavior. It was a life defined by calculated moves, subtle persuasion, and the constant assessment of risk and opportunity. The palace, with all its splendor and scrutiny, was a stage for these dynamics, and the concubine's success depended on her mastery of its many layers. Through intelligence, adaptability, and strategic skill, she could influence rulers, shape policies, and leave an enduring mark on history, even in circumstances designed to limit her autonomy. Life as a concubine was not merely a test of beauty, intelligence, or strategic skill. It was, above all, a profound exercise in emotional and psychological endurance. While the palace walls glittered with gold, silk, and ornamentation, they also enclosed a world where fear, loneliness, and uncertainty were constant companions. To survive, a concubine had to navigate not only the visible dangers of court politics and rivalries, but also the invisible, relentless pressures of the mind and heart. The emotional landscape of a concubine's life was intricate, fraught with tension, longing, and the constant negotiation between desire and self-preservation. In many ways, understanding this inner world is key to understanding the full scope of what concubinage truly entailed. The first and most pervasive element of a concubine's emotional life was uncertainty. Unlike a legally recognized wife, whose position might be more secure and whose role in succession more defined, a concubine's fate rested entirely on the whims of her patron. Favor could be fleeting, and disfavor could arrive suddenly, for reasons as trivial as a perceived slight, a change in the ruler's mood, or the appearance of a new rival. This uncertainty created a state of constant vigilance, a psychological strain that demanded both resilience and careful calculation. Every word spoken, every gesture made, had potential consequences, and the inability to predict these consequences was a source of ongoing anxiety. A concubine had to learn to live with ambiguity, to navigate a world in which her position could shift overnight, and to manage the emotional toll of such unpredictability. Isolation was another defining feature of concubinage. Despite being surrounded by attendants, rivals, and fellow concubines, genuine companionship was scarce. Friendships were often fragile, alliances temporary, and any form of intimacy could carry hidden motives. The social structure of the palace dictated constant observation and competition, making trust a rare commodity. In such an environment, even those relationships that appeared supportive were frequently tinged with caution and calculation. Emotional resilience became essential, for concubines needed to manage not only their own fears and desires, but also the potential threats and manipulations of those around them. Jealousy and rivalry shaped much of the psychological landscape. A concubine's beauty, intelligence, or talent could provoke envy, leading to subtle sabotage, gossip, or overt confrontation. Rivalries were rarely straightforward. They involved layers of intrigue, alliances, and manipulations, with concubines constantly assessing not only the actions of their peers, but also the intentions behind them. Even minor incidents, a careless glance, a slight exaggeration of charm, a moment of inattentiveness, could be interpreted as a challenge or threat, with potential consequences for status, favor, or security. Managing these dynamics required acute awareness, strategic thinking, and the ability to maintain emotional composure under pressure. Love and affection, when present, were complex and often complicated by duty and ambition. While concubines might form genuine bonds with their patrons, these relationships were always subject to the dynamics of power, hierarchy, and rivalry. Emotional attachment could bring comfort and security, but it also carried risk. Affection could be withdrawn, manipulated, or exploited, leaving concubines vulnerable to emotional harm. The capacity to navigate these relationships required a careful balance between openness and caution, between expressing desire and maintaining independence. Emotional intelligence, understanding the nuances of the ruler's behavior, anticipating reactions, and responding appropriately, became as crucial as beauty or skill. The psychological impact of confinement and control cannot be overstated. Despite access to luxury and culture, concubines lived in spaces where movement was restricted, routines were regulated, and autonomy was limited. Privacy was rare, and every action could be observed, judged, or reported. This environment demanded self-regulation, discipline, and the ability to find meaning and satisfaction within narrow confines. For many, the creation of personal routines, engagement in artistic pursuits, or intellectual study provided a measure of control and autonomy, allowing them to assert identity and agency within the constraints of their circumstances. Fear was a constant companion, often manifesting as both rational concern and pervasive anxiety. The threat of losing favor, being supplanted by a rival, or facing punishment created a heightened state of alertness. This fear could be paralyzing if unmitigated, yet it could also serve as a motivator, sharpening observation, enhancing social skill, and reinforcing vigilance. Learning to manage fear, to channel it productively, and to maintain composure under stress was a critical component of emotional survival. Concubines who succumbed to fear risked mistakes, misjudgments, or visible displays of vulnerability that could imperil their position. The interplay between hope and despair was another defining aspect of a concubine's inner life. Favor could inspire hope for increased influence, security, or the possibility of bearing a child who might elevate her status. Yet this hope was fragile, dependent on factors beyond her control. Conversely, periods of neglect or disfavor could induce despair, highlighting the tenuousness of her existence. Emotional resilience required the ability to navigate these extremes, maintaining equilibrium even in the face of shifting fortunes. A concubine who could endure disappointment, recover from setbacks, and continue to project grace and competence was more likely to survive and thrive. Concubines also had to negotiate the tension between self-interest and strategic calculation. Pursuing influence, seeking favor, or forming alliances often required suppressing personal desires, masking emotions, or acting contrary to instinct. This dissonance could create internal conflict, as concubines balanced their own needs and ambitions with the requirements of survival and strategy. Emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and the ability to compartmentalize became essential tools, allowing concubines to maintain composure and make calculated decisions despite inner turmoil. The experience of aging introduced additional psychological challenges. Youth and beauty, while transient, were central to a concubine's ability to attract and maintain favor. As physical appearance waned, concubines had to adapt, relying increasingly on intelligence, skill, and strategic acumen. Some successfully transitioned into advisory or mentorship roles, guiding younger concubines, influencing decisions, and cultivating networks of support. Others, unable to navigate the shift, experienced marginalization or loss of influence. Adapting to these changes required resilience, self-understanding, and the capacity to redefine identity and purpose within the constraints of palace life. Emotional survival also demanded careful management of family and external relationships. While some concubines maintained connections with their families, these relationships could be sources of both support and risk. Families might advocate for their daughter, seek advantage, or become involved in court intrigue, exposing the concubine to additional pressures. Balancing loyalty to family with the imperatives of survival and strategy required judgment, negotiation, and emotional flexibility. Missteps could imperil not only the concubine but also her family, heightening the stakes of every decision. Spiritual practice often provided solace, structure, and psychological resilience. Participation in religious rituals, meditation, or reflection allowed concubines to cultivate a sense of purpose, maintain inner discipline, and find comfort amidst uncertainty. Spiritual engagement could also enhance favor, demonstrating piety and moral propriety to the ruler and court. Beyond these pragmatic considerations, faith or contemplative practice offered a means of sustaining hope, enduring hardship, and managing the emotional demands of life in the palace. The capacity for empathy and understanding of human behavior was another psychological necessity. Concubines had to interpret the desires, moods, and intentions of their patron, peers, and attendants, often reading subtle cues to anticipate shifts in fortune or opportunity. Emotional intelligence enabled them to navigate the intricate web of alliances, rivalries, and expectations with greater efficacy. Misreading a situation could result in humiliation, demotion, or removal, while accurate perception could enhance influence, preserve favor, and protect against threats. Isolation, uncertainty, rivalry, fear, hope, despair, adaptation, strategic calculation, spiritual practice, and emotional intelligence all coexisted in a concubine's inner life. Together, they created a psychological environment that was both demanding and transformative. Success required resilience, insight, patience, and adaptability, along with the capacity to manage both internal and external pressures. Those who mastered these demands not only survived but often thrived, achieving influence, stability, and, in rare cases, enduring legacy. The emotional world of concubinage also highlights the human capacity for endurance, creativity, and subtlety in navigating complex social structures. Even in constrained circumstances, concubines found ways to exercise agency, assert influence, and maintain identity. Emotional resilience was not merely a survival mechanism, it was a form of power, enabling concubines to negotiate a world defined by uncertainty, hierarchy, and constant observation. Understanding this inner world provides a more complete picture of concubinage. Beyond the surface of luxury, beauty, and privilege lay a landscape of profound emotional and psychological challenge. Daily life was a constant negotiation between external demands and internal responses, requiring skill, intelligence, and adaptability. Emotional resilience was not optional. It was essential for survival and influence. The stories of concubines reveal not only the pressures of their environment, but also the remarkable capacities they developed to navigate, endure, and shape their lives. In reflecting on this, one realizes that the life of a concubine was defined as much by the mind and heart as by the body or intellect. Emotional acuity, psychological flexibility, and resilience under pressure were as critical as beauty, charm, or strategic skill. Survival depended on understanding the complex dynamics of favor, fear, rivalry, and alliance, and on managing one's own emotional responses in a high-stakes environment. The concubine's inner life was thus both a crucible and a source of potential power, shaping her capacity to influence, endure, and navigate the uncertainties of the court. Ultimately, the emotional and psychological experience of concubinage reveals a world of intense pressures and extraordinary skill. Concubines had to manage isolation, rivalry, uncertainty, and fear while cultivating hope, intelligence, and strategic insight. Their ability to navigate these challenges determined their survival, influence, and legacy. This inner landscape, hidden from public view, was as critical to a concubine's existence as any external display of beauty, talent, or charm. It is within this psychological world that the true complexity of concubinage becomes evident, a life of both peril and potential, where emotional resilience, intelligence, and insight were as vital as any other form of skill or advantage. Life as a concubine, then, was an intricate tapestry of emotional and psychological challenge, demanding constant vigilance, adaptability, and skill. It was a life that tested the limits of endurance, intelligence, and self-control, requiring mastery not only of social dynamics, but also of one's own inner world. Those who succeeded navigated a labyrinth of fear, hope, rivalry, and influence, achieving both survival and, in some cases, remarkable power. Their stories illuminate the human capacity to endure, adapt, and thrive in environments of extreme complexity, offering insights into the resilience, subtlety, and ingenuity required to navigate the hidden corridors of history. Life as a concubine was not merely a matter of endurance or submission. It was an education in strategy, negotiation, and personal empowerment. Beneath the veneer of silk, jewels, and ceremony lay a world where every action could determine a woman's fate, and survival depended on mastering both overt and subtle forms of power. While much of the world outside the palace understood concubinage as a life of luxury and glamour, those who lived it knew that true influence required intelligence, foresight, and the skillful management of relationships, perception, and opportunity. The most successful concubines understood that power was often hidden, exercised in quiet moments, through observation, subtle persuasion, and strategic action. From the very beginning, a concubine's journey was one of calculated adaptation. Arriving at court or palace, she entered a highly structured environment governed by rules, hierarchies, and intricate social codes. Her survival and advancement required rapid learning, understanding the nuances of etiquette, the unspoken rules of interaction, and the delicate dynamics between rulers, officials, attendants, and fellow concubines. This initial period was often overwhelming, with every gesture and word carrying weight. The ability to assess her surroundings, anticipate potential challenges, and identify opportunities became essential. Early missteps could have long, lasting consequences, while early displays of intelligence, tact, and grace could establish a foundation for influence. Observation was among the most critical tools a concubine possessed. She needed to study the moods, preferences, and tendencies of the ruler, decipher the alliances and rivalries among peers, and understand the ambitions and loyalties of attendants and officials. This constant observation allowed a concubine to anticipate shifts in favor, identify threats, and seize opportunities. The most astute women developed a near-photographic awareness of court dynamics, reading subtle facial expressions, body language, and tones of voice to infer intentions and predict behavior. Observation was not passive. It was an active analytical process, forming the basis for informed decision-making and strategic action. Relationship building was equally central to a concubine's strategy. Alliances could provide protection, information, and leverage, while rivals could threaten both position and life. Effective concubines cultivated networks of trust and mutual benefit, aligning themselves with individuals whose influence or position could support their goals. These relationships required careful maintenance. Loyalty had to be earned and demonstrated. Favors had to be balanced with discretion, and alliances had to be continually assessed for stability and utility. The cultivation of these networks was both art and science, demanding insight, timing, and emotional intelligence. Communication was a critical element of influence and survival. A concubine's words, gestures, and expressions were tools of power, capable of swaying decisions, reinforcing loyalty, or undermining rivals. Subtlety was paramount. Overt ambition could provoke jealousy or suspicion, while silence could be interpreted as weakness or disinterest. Mastery of language, both spoken and unspoken, allowed concubines to convey messages, negotiate influence, and maintain favor without attracting unwanted attention. In essence, communication was a strategic instrument, a means of shaping perception, managing relationships, and navigating the complex social hierarchy of the court. Concubines also learned to leverage their talents and skills for influence. Artistic ability, musical proficiency, knowledge of literature, and intellectual acumen were not merely personal accomplishments. They were strategic tools. Engaging the ruler in conversation, demonstrating skill in performance, or providing insight on cultural or political matters could enhance a concubine's standing, secure favor, and create opportunities for influence. These talents also served to distinguish one concubine from another, allowing her to carve out a unique position within a competitive environment. The cultivation of skills required discipline, dedication, and foresight, but it provided a measure of autonomy and power in a life otherwise constrained by external control. Strategic patience was another hallmark of survival and influence. A concubine could not rely solely on immediate results. Advancement required careful timing, observation of the court's rhythms, and an understanding of longer-term dynamics. Opportunities to gain favor or exert influence often emerged gradually, and the ability to act decisively at the right moment could determine success or failure. Patience was complemented by adaptability, the capacity to adjust strategies in response to changing circumstances, shifting alliances, or the appearance of new rivals. Those who mastered both patience and adaptability could navigate the palace's uncertainties with resilience and strategic foresight. Emotional intelligence underpinned many of these strategies. The ability to manage one's own emotions, read the emotions of others, and respond appropriately was critical. Concubines faced constant scrutiny, competition, and ambiguity, and mismanagement of emotion could lead to disfavor or danger. Emotional control allowed concubines to project confidence, grace, and competence, even in situations of stress or uncertainty. It also enabled them to negotiate relationships skillfully, using empathy, persuasion, and subtlety to maintain influence and protect their positions. The management of perception was an essential tool of hidden power. Concubines understood that appearances mattered as much as reality. The way they presented themselves, through demeanor, dress, speech, and behavior, shaped the perceptions of the ruler, peers, and attendants. A carefully curated image could reinforce authority, demonstrate loyalty, or signal intelligence and sophistication. Conversely, missteps in presentation could invite scrutiny, diminish influence, or provoke rivalries. Managing perception required constant attention, self-awareness, and strategic planning. Concubines also learned to anticipate and mitigate threats. The court was a landscape of constant competition, where rivals could exploit weaknesses and unforeseen events could alter fortunes. Identifying potential risks, assessing their likelihood and impact, and developing contingency strategies were critical skills. This could involve forming alliances, gathering information, discreetly countering rival actions, or subtly reinforcing one's position. The ability to anticipate threats and act preemptively was a defining feature of concubines who achieved long-term stability and influence. Education and knowledge were not merely cultural accomplishments, they were strategic assets. Concubines who could engage in informed discussion, provide advice, or demonstrate intellectual acumen gained respect and authority. Knowledge of politics, history, and current events allowed them to advise the ruler, influence decision-making, and navigate complex social dynamics. In some cases, concubines became trusted counselors. Their insights sought not only for cultural or personal reasons, but for their practical value in governance and diplomacy. Knowledge was both protection and power, enhancing a concubine's ability to navigate uncertainty and assert influence. Adaptation to aging and changing circumstances was a further element of hidden power. As physical beauty waned, concubines relied increasingly on intelligence, strategic insight, and social skill. Successful women transitioned into advisory roles, mentorship positions, or patronage activities, leveraging experience and reputation to maintain influence. Others cultivated protégés, shaping the next generation of concubines and extending their legacy indirectly. Adaptability allowed concubines to convert potential decline into opportunity, demonstrating resilience, foresight, and the capacity for sustained strategic thinking. The cultivation of resilience and personal growth was intertwined with survival strategies. Life in the palace was demanding, unpredictable, and often perilous, and those who endured developed remarkable capacities for self-discipline, observation, and emotional management. Concubines honed their ability to navigate social complexity, anticipate challenges, and respond effectively to adversity. This personal growth was not abstract. It translated directly into practical advantages in influence, security, and strategic maneuvering. In many cases, the skills developed through necessity became lifelong assets, allowing concubines to exert power and shape outcomes in ways that transcended the palace. Spiritual and psychological practices also supported hidden power. Some concubines drew on religion, meditation, or contemplation to maintain emotional balance, cultivate patience, and sustain hope. These practices offered resilience in the face of uncertainty and reinforced strategic thinking by fostering clarity, focus, and perspective. Spiritual engagement provided both inner strength and social advantage, enhancing perceptions of piety, moral standing, and wisdom. It was a form of power that operated subtly, shaping both self-conception and the perceptions of others. The ability to cultivate loyalty and influence without overt displays of ambition was a defining characteristic of successful concubines. Open assertion of power could provoke rivals or arouse suspicion, while passive compliance could lead to marginalization. Those who mastered the art of subtle influence through advice, demonstration of skill, strategic alignment, or quiet persuasion could secure long-term stability and authority. This hidden power, exercised behind the scenes, was often more durable and effective than overt displays of control. Concubines also learned to leverage risk strategically. Opportunities for advancement often involved calculated risk, whether in forming alliances, speaking at opportune moments, or influencing decisions subtly. Understanding when to act, how to act, and when restraint was more advantageous required judgment, foresight, and confidence. Risk management became an essential component of strategic power, balancing potential gains against the threat of failure or reprisal. Those who mastered this balance enhanced their influence, reinforced their security, and sometimes altered the course of events within the court. Mentorship and intergenerational influence were additional avenues for hidden power. Experienced concubines often guided newcomers, shaping behavior, teaching skills, and imparting strategic insight. This mentorship allowed senior concubines to extend influence beyond their immediate presence, creating networks of loyalty and reinforcing their authority. Guiding others also served as a mechanism for consolidating knowledge, maintaining stability, and perpetuating the social and strategic structures of the palace. In essence, concubinage was a school of strategy, personal growth, and hidden power. Those who thrived developed mastery in observation, emotional intelligence, communication, relationship building, talent cultivation, risk management, adaptability, and mentorship. They learned to navigate complexity, influence outcomes subtly, and exercise authority in ways that were often invisible to outsiders. Success required integrating multiple dimensions of skill, intellectual, emotional, social, and strategic into a coherent approach that balanced ambition with discretion, influence with survival, and skill with adaptability. The lessons of concubinage extended beyond the palace walls. The development of resilience, strategic insight, and emotional acuity had implications for broader life, politics, and cultural influence. Concubines who mastered these skills not only survived the immediate environment, but often left lasting legacies, whether through direct influence on rulers, indirect guidance of protégés, or contributions to cultural, artistic, and intellectual life. Their hidden power, exercised subtly and persistently, shaped history in ways that were profound, enduring, and often overlooked. Ultimately, the life of a concubine was a study in hidden strength, personal growth, and the exercise of subtle power. It required constant learning, observation, reflection, and action. It demanded emotional resilience, social intelligence, and strategic foresight. Those who succeeded were not merely passive figures of beauty. They were architects of influence, masters of subtlety, and exemplars of adaptability and skill. Their lives reveal a dimension of history where power was exercised quietly, strategically, and with extraordinary nuance, demonstrating that influence often lies not in overt dominance, but in the mastery of perception, relationships, and self. The life of a concubine, as we have explored, was defined by complexity, strategy, and emotional resilience, but it was equally shaped by cost, sacrifice, and uncertainty. While some concubines rose to remarkable positions of influence and left enduring legacies, many faced the harsh reality that their lives, however luxurious in appearance, exacted profound personal, emotional, and social tolls. The palace, a space of grandeur and privilege, was simultaneously a site of confinement, surveillance, and relentless pressure. Understanding the ultimate consequences of this life requires examining not only the potential for influence and power, but also the costs of navigating a world where favor was fleeting, competition unceasing, and personal freedom constrained. The most immediate cost of concubinage was personal autonomy. From the moment a woman entered the palace, her life was largely dictated by the expectations, routines, and desires of others, most critically, the ruler she served. Daily schedules, attire, behavior, interactions, and even private thoughts were subject to scrutiny, whether through attendants, eunuchs, or the ever-watchful eyes of fellow concubines. Opportunities for independent action were limited, and deviation from prescribed norms could have severe consequences. Even moments of leisure were mediated by social rules and political considerations, making personal agency a rare and valuable commodity. This loss of autonomy extended to fundamental life choices. The selection of marriage, family, and career were frequently beyond a concubine's control. Every decision had to be carefully calculated to maintain favor, navigate alliances, and avoid the pitfalls of disfavor. Physical and emotional health were also at risk. Maintaining the appearance of beauty, youth, and vitality demanded constant attention and discipline. Diets, exercise regimens, grooming routines, and medical interventions were enforced to ensure the concubine remained desirable, energetic, and capable of performing the demanding roles of entertainment, companionship, and cultural display. While these regimens could preserve physical allure, they also exacted a toll, requiring strict adherence and often involving deprivation or discomfort. Emotional health, too, was under constant strain. Anxiety over favor, rivalry, and the future was pervasive, and periods of neglect or disfavor could induce despair. The psychological burden of sustaining composure, managing complex social interactions, and navigating uncertainty was relentless, and for many, the stress manifested in isolation, depression, or exhaustion. One of the most profound costs of life as a concubine was the limitation on genuine emotional intimacy. Relationships were frequently instrumental rather than personal, driven by survival, strategy, or ambition. Affection, friendship, and love could be fleeting, manipulated, or compromised by the necessities of court life. Even the bond with the ruler, while potentially rewarding, was fraught with unpredictability. Favor could be withdrawn suddenly, leaving a concubine vulnerable to neglect, rivalry, or outright hostility. The very relationships that might provide comfort or support were embedded within a network of competition and strategic calculation, making authentic connection difficult to maintain. This emotional isolation